If you drive down a quiet highway in the Appalachian Mountains today, you might stumble upon a state historical marker bearing a chilling and unprecedented claim. It commemorates the only known case in the history of the American justice system, where the testimony of a lingering spirit was used to convict a murderer. What followed was an investigation, a trial, and a bizarre story that captured the public's attention, not just for the brutal crime itself, but for how a dead woman successfully put her own killer behind bars. In the late 19th century, Greenbrier County, West Virginia, was a quiet, tight-knit Appalachian community where the towering mountains kept secrets hidden and everyone knew their neighbor's business. It was here, in the brisk autumn of 1896, that a 23-year-old local woman named Edward Heaster crossed paths with a charismatic newcomer. His name was Erasmus Stribling Trout Shue, though the locals simply knew him as Edward. He had recently arrived in town to start a new life, securing a respectable position as the local blacksmith. To the townspeople, the muscular and well-spoken blacksmith seemed like a decent catch. However, beneath his charming exterior lay a remarkably dark and troubled history. Edward had been married twice before he ever set foot in Greenbrier County. His first marriage ended in a bitter divorce fueled by allegations of extreme physical cruelty, while his second wife suffered an even grimmer fate, dying suddenly under highly suspicious circumstances just 8 months after their wedding. Whispers of a mysterious head injury circulated, but nothing was ever legally proven. Unaware, or perhaps willfully ignorant of these ominous red flags, Zona was thoroughly captivated by the handsome stranger. Their romance escalated with dizzying speed. Within mere weeks of their initial meeting, the couple decided to wed. This hasty union completely disregarded the fierce, vocal objections of Zona's mother, Mary Jane Heaster. Mary Jane possessed a deep, unsettling intuition about the blacksmith. She took an immediate dislike to Edward, sensing a violent undercurrent behind his polished demeanor. Despite her mother's desperate pleas, Zona married Edward in late October of 1896, dreaming of a peaceful domestic life. That dream would barely survive the winter. The tragic culmination of their brief marriage arrived on the bitterly cold afternoon of January 23, 1897. Edward, working at the blacksmith shop, asked a young neighborhood errand boy to go to his house and check on Zona, claiming she had been feeling unwell that morning. When the boy arrived at the Shue residence, he knocked but received no answer. Pushing open the unlocked door, he stepped into the silent hallway and was met with a horrifying sight. Zona lay motionless on the floor at the foot of the wooden stairs, stretched out in a terrifyingly unnatural position, with her head resting at an odd angle. Panic swept through the small community as the boy ran for help. The local physician, Dr. George W. Knapp, was urgently summoned to the scene. By the time Dr. Knapp arrived, Edward had already returned home from the shop, picked up his wife's lifeless body, and carried her upstairs to their bedroom. During the brief medical examination, Edward exhibited extreme distress, weeping loudly and physically cradling Zona's head and shoulders, making it difficult for the doctor to thoroughly inspect her. Consequently, Dr. Knapp's examination was rushed and incomplete. He initially ruled the 23-year-old's cause of death as an everlasting faint, a bizarre and archaic diagnosis that he later awkwardly amended to childbirth complications or heart failure. The sudden, shocking loss of the young bride cast a heavy, somber tone over Greenbrier County. A vibrant 23-year-old woman was dead just 3 months after exchanging her wedding vows. The community grieved the tragic accident, mourning a life cut violently short by an apparent medical anomaly. Yet, as the town prepared to lay Zona to rest, the profound sorrow of a grieving mother was about to slowly curdle into a chilling suspicion. As the initial shock of Zona's sudden death settled over the tight-knit Appalachian community, the atmosphere inside the Shue household slowly morphed from genuine mourning into a creeping, undeniable unease. During the customary wake, Edward's behavior was nothing short of erratic. Rather than sitting in quiet reflection, the grieving widower paced aggressively around the parlor, his excessive wailing echoing off the wooden walls. He positioned himself as a fiercely territorial sentry next to the open casket, physically blocking family members and neighbors who stepped forward to pay their final respects. Anyone who lingered too closely to the head of the coffin was swiftly ushered away by the agitated blacksmith. What struck the mourners as even more deeply unsettling was the way the young bride had been prepared for burial. Instead of the simple, modest burial garments customary for women of that era, Edward had personally dressed Zona in her finest Sunday attire, a stiff, intricately designed dress featuring an unusually high collar. Adding to the bizarre spectacle, he had carefully wrapped a thick, folded veil around her neck multiple times. When gently questioned by bewildered relatives about these strange sartorial choices, Edward defensively insisted that it was Zona's favorite dress. He then took his macabre theatricality a step further, aggressively wedging a rolled-up sheet on one side of her head and a folded piece of clothing on the other, bizarrely claiming that he simply wanted his beloved wife to rest easier. Standing silently in the shadows of the parlor, Mary Jane Heaster observed these peculiar anomalies with a piercing, analytical gaze. The grieving mother had never trusted her daughter's charming new husband, and watching him frantically construct a physical and visual barricade around the corpse only fueled her darkest fears. The most chilling moment occurred later that afternoon as the pallbearers lifted the coffin to transport it to the local cemetery. As the wooden box shifted, Mary Jane watched in horror as Zona's head rolled with an unnatural, sickening looseness, completely unsupported by the stiff collar and makeshift pillows. It was a subtle, fleeting movement, but for Mary Jane, it was the final, devastating piece of a terrifying puzzle. In the days following the burial, the heavy blanket of sorrow suffocating Mary Jane began to harden into a burning, visceral conviction. She no longer merely suspected Edward of mistreating her daughter. She was absolutely certain that the blacksmith had brutally murdered her. The high collar, the thick veil, the aggressive guarding of the coffin. It was all a frantic performance designed to hide a fatal injury. But in the male-dominated legal system of 1897 West Virginia, a grieving mother's intuition and circumstantial parlor gossip were simply not enough to secure an arrest warrant against a respected local tradesman. To force the hand of the law, Mary Jane needed a miracle or a message from the grave. Desperate for answers and paralyzed by the lack of earthly justice, Mary Jane Heaster turned to the only power she believed could expose the truth. In the late 19th century, folk magic and spiritualism were woven into the fabric of mountain life, but for a grieving Appalachian woman, actively seeking a sign from the dead was a profound act of desperation. Night after night, the mourning mother knelt by her bed in the secluded wooden cabin, praying fervently for a revelation from beyond the grave. She refused to sleep in total darkness, keeping a small oil lamp burning brightly in her bedroom, leaving it as a flickering beacon for whatever restless spirit might be wandering the shadowed hills. Her pleas were not for peaceful closure, but for the undeniable truth of what had happened to her daughter on that freezing January afternoon. Her relentless prayers were eventually answered in a manner that would cement her name in American legal history. It began on a bitterly cold night when the faint, warm glow of her oil lamp seemed to dim, swallowed by a sudden, unnatural chill that permeated the cramped bedroom. Slowly, a blindingly bright light materialized in the corner of the room. As Mary Jane watched in frozen terror from her bed, the luminous haze began to shift and solidify, gradually taking the unmistakable, glowing form of Zona Heaster. The apparition did not float aimlessly or moan like a phantom in a penny dreadful. It stepped forward with agonizing purpose, crossing the threshold between the living and the dead to finally speak. This chilling encounter was not a solitary, fleeting hallucination, born of a mother's fractured, grieving psyche. The visitation quickly established a terrifying and deliberate pattern. For 4 consecutive nights, the ghostly figure of Zona returned to the small wooden cabin. Each evening, the spectral presence would manifest in the same eerie light, lingering just long enough to deliver its harrowing testimony in the quiet darkness before fading away as the Appalachian dawn approached. It was as if the dead woman was meticulously building a legal case from the afterlife, ensuring her mother understood and memorized every gruesome detail of her demise. The visual details of the apparition were remarkably specific and deeply unsettling. The ghost was entirely draped in the exact same stiff, high-collared dress she had been buried in, complete with the thick veil wrapped tightly around her throat. When the spirit finally spoke, her voice was a hollow, sorrowful echo of the vibrant 23-year-old girl Mary Jane once knew. Zona detailed the events of January 23, explaining that Edward had flown into a violent, uncontrollable rage that evening. The fatal argument had sparked over something utterly trivial. He was furious that she had not prepared roasted meat for his supper, offering him only fruit, bread, and butter instead. What elevated this spectral encounter from a mere Appalachian folktale to a piece of damning evidence was the astonishing anatomical precision of the spirit's claims. The ghost did not vaguely complain of being attacked or poisoned. She provided a clinical, step-by-step account of a fatal physical assault. Zona explicitly stated that Edward had mercilessly battered her before his large, calloused blacksmith hands clamped down on her throat. She revealed that he had brutally crushed her windpipe and, with a sudden, violent twist, snapped her neck completely at the very first cervical vertebra. To demonstrate the horrific severity of the unseen injury, the apparition slowly turned her head completely backward, confirming the terrifying reality of the unsupported, loose neck Mary Jane had witnessed when the coffin was moved at the funeral. The emotional weight of these 4 nights was almost too much for the human mind to bear. Mary Jane was forced to endure the horrifying realization of her daughter's final, agonizing moments of terror, listening helplessly as the ghost recounted the brutal betrayal by the man she had loved and married. The profound sorrow of losing an only daughter was compounded by the searing trauma of hearing the exact, violent mechanics of her murder directly from her lingering spirit. Yet, this immense trauma forged an unbreakable resolve within Mary Jane. She was no longer just a mourning mother weeping at a gravesite, but the sole guardian of her daughter's devastating truth. Through these supernatural visitations, the ghost had provided a highly specific, medically testable diagnosis of her own murder, details that the rushed local doctor had completely missed. but a monumental legal hurdle remained. In the rigid, patriarchal, and evidence-driven justice system of late 19th century America, a woman's intuition was already easily dismissed as emotional hysteria. How on earth could Mary Jane Heaster possibly use a four-night ghost story to convince a skeptical, highly educated prosecutor, secure the literal exhumation of a buried corpse, and put a cunning murderer behind bars? Armed with the harrowing, anatomically precise revelations from her spectral encounters, Mary Jane Heaster wasted no time. She marched directly into the office of the local prosecuting attorney, John A. Preston. For hours, the grieving mother sat in his quiet office, meticulously recounting every chilling detail the ghost of her daughter had delivered in the dead of night. Preston found himself trapped in a profound professional dilemma. He was a strict man of the law, operating in a late 19th century legal system that was increasingly relying on tangible evidence and emerging forensic science, not the supernatural folklore of the Appalachian Mountains. Yet, he could not easily dismiss Mary Jane's claims. Her absolute, unwavering conviction, coupled with the swirling local gossip about Edward Shue's violent temper and the highly suspicious deaths of his previous two wives, formed a compelling foundation of doubt. It was enough to push the pragmatic prosecutor to take a radical, highly controversial step. On the freezing, overcast morning of February 22, 1897, a somber procession gathered at the local cemetery. Under Preston's official legal orders, a crew of men began the grim, arduous task of breaking through the hard, frozen earth to exhume Elva Zona Heaster's wooden coffin. By law, Edward Shue was required to be present during the disinterment of his wife's remains. The previously arrogant and aggressive blacksmith, who had guarded the casket so fiercely at the wake, was now visibly unraveling. As the shovels relentlessly struck the icy soil, Edward paced nervously around the gravesite. His intimidating bravado was entirely replaced by sheer panic, and he was heard repeatedly muttering to anyone who would listen that the authorities would not be able to prove a single thing against him. Once the mud-caked casket was finally pulled from the cold ground, it was immediately transported to the local one-room schoolhouse, which had been hastily converted into a makeshift morgue for the day. Dr. George W. Knapp, the very physician who had initially conducted the rushed examination and completely missed the signs of foul play, was joined by two other medical professionals to perform a thorough and exhaustive autopsy. This time, there was no weeping, aggressive husband hovering over the body to restrict their access. The doctors meticulously examined the corpse, specifically focusing their attention on the head and neck area that Mary Jane's apparition had so clearly highlighted. The medical findings they uncovered on the wooden tables of that schoolhouse were nothing short of shocking. When the physicians carefully opened the neck, they discovered that Zona's windpipe had been violently crushed. Even more damning, her neck was entirely dislocated, completely snapped at the first cervical vertebra, the atlas with the surrounding ligaments viciously torn and bruised. It was a catastrophic injury requiring immense, brutal physical force, entirely ruling out any possibility of a natural death, childbirth complications, or a simple, everlasting faint. The three physicians stood in stunned silence. The severe anatomical damage they were looking at under the harsh daylight was a 100% flawless match to the medical diagnosis provided by a ghost in a dark, isolated cabin. The impossible had just been scientifically verified. Mary Jane's bizarre spectral testimony had successfully yielded undeniable, hard physical evidence of a brutal homicide. Edward Shue's desperate muttering at the cemetery had been in vain. He was immediately taken into custody and formally charged with the murder of his wife. But unearthing the truth in a makeshift morgue was only half the war. Proving the mechanics of a murder was one thing. Convincing a rational jury to hang a man based on an investigation sparked by a supernatural tip-off would be an entirely different, unprecedented battle. In June of 1897, the trial of Erasmus Stribling Trout Shue officially opened, turning the local courthouse into a theater of packed benches and breathless public anticipation. The prosecution, acutely aware of the delicate and unprecedented nature of their case, deployed a highly disciplined strategy that relied strictly on empirical facts. They pinned their entire argument on the brutal, undeniable trauma documented during the recent exhumation and Edward's wildly erratic behavior following his wife's demise. By completely avoiding the spectral visitations that had originally triggered the entire investigation, the state effectively built an airtight wall of scientific and behavioral credibility around their narrative, leaving no room for the defense to cry witchcraft or emotional delusion. Seeing their client cornered by hard forensic evidence, the defense team scrambled for a desperate countermeasure and stumbled directly into a fatal strategic trap. Believing they could easily dismantle the state's case by destroying its emotional core, the defense attorney aggressively cross-examined Mary Jane Heaster, deliberately bringing up the highly volatile subject of the 4 nights of ghost visitations. Their calculated goal was to paint the mother as a grief-stricken, hysterical lunatic whose wild, supernatural hallucinations had manipulated the town's legal system. It was a high-stakes gamble designed to make the entire investigation look farcical, relying on the deep-seated biases of a 19th-century courtroom to completely invalidate her devastating testimony. But instead of crumbling under the intense, mocking pressure of the courtroom, Mary Jane proved to be a formidable and unshakable force on the witness stand. She delivered her testimony with razor-sharp clarity, displaying a fierce, articulate consistency that left the defense utterly blindsided and mute. She recounted the spectral details not with frantic emotion, but with the calm, haunting precision of someone stating absolute, undeniable facts. This unexpected display of unwavering conviction completely backfired on the defense, thoroughly captivating the jury and shifting the emotional tide of the entire room. After the closing arguments, the jury retired to deliberate, returning in a mere 1 hour and 10 minutes with a unanimous verdict of guilty, cementing a sentence of life imprisonment for the murderous blacksmith. With the trial concluded, history was left with an enduring, tantalizing riddle that modern historians and psychologists still eagerly dissect today. Did Mary Jane Heaster truly see a ghost? A brilliant, profoundly rational alternative suggests that she was simply a remarkably observant woman trapped in a society that refused to listen to her. Sitting in that tense parlor during the wake, she had quietly processed the high collar, the thick veil, the rolled-up sheet bracing the corpse, and the sickeningly loose movement of her daughter's head, combining those red flags with her pre-existing knowledge of Edward's violent, dark past. Her brilliant subconscious may have woven these terrifying observations into a series of vivid dreams, or more calculatedly, she recognized that a patriarchal 19th-century court would completely mock and dismiss a woman's intuitive suspicions. To bypass this systemic wall, she strategically weaponized the deep-rooted, superstitious folklore of the Appalachian Mountains, creating a narrative so compellingly chilling that it forced the hand of the law to seek the material truth. Ultimately, whether driven by a literal, phantom or tactical brilliance, the legend of the Greenbrier ghost remains a testament to the terrifying, unstoppable genius of a mother's love and the extraordinary lengths she will go to secure justice for her child. If you want to dive deeper into these forgotten corners of history, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Was Mary Jane visited by a genuine ghost, or was she a brilliant, tactical genius ahead of her time? Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, leave a review, and if you would like to support the show. Thank you for listening, and I will see you again soon.